Hi folks, most people did pretty well on the test. I was pleased. What I'm going to do here is quickly go over the answers, and if there are any things that you needed a little bit of explanation on or that you just want to review, you can do it here. We started with some symbolization problems, and the first one was pretty straightforward. The comma is the important thing here because it tells us how to break the sentence into its two main clauses. So we know that there's a clause about Singing Jones, a clause about Frisch, and we know by the punctuation in the if that it's an if-then sentence. The bit about Frisch comes after the arrow. Sing will attend unless Jones does. Well, the easiest way to deal with unless is to treat it as an or. You can do it as a conditional if you like, treating it as if not, but you're more likely to make mistakes. So that's the answer to this one. Carrying on, a little bit more complicated. Neither Woodstock nor Hartland is in Aroostook County, comma, main break. But indicates a conjunction. Presque Isle and Florenceville aren't both in Maine. The famous aren't both construction. So we know it's an and statement because the but is a conjunction. Neither nor, we can do that in two different ways. We can do it like this as the denial of an either or we can put it as the conjunction of two denials. It doesn't matter which you do. Then what's left is to deal with Presque Isle and Florenceville aren't both in Maine. Well, aren't both is like putting a not in front of a bracket where the bracket is a conjunction. So whichever way you prefer to do the first half, this is what you're going to get. Not both is going to have this form. Now this one you've got to read more carefully. Only on condition that Jeff will be hired if and only if Brandy is, will CompCom's business model succeed. That's a bit complicated. You got to figure out how to break it into clauses. You've got only on condition that, so you know that something is being picked out as the consequent here. But you've got to figure out where this clause stops. Well, given the way that we normally would speak, it's this use of the word will here, I think, that is the clue, and also the fact that the Brandy is ties us elliptically back to Jeff being hired. So we know that Jeff being hired and Brandy being hired are related. And we also know because this business about Jeff and Brandy is the clause after an only if, and only on condition that, it's going to go in the blank after the arrow. The bit about CompCom comes before the arrow. Only on condition that is like only if. So this is what we've got. Now look at this. Jeff will be hired if and only if Brandy is. That's straightforward. The last one is trickiest. Either if it rains, only if it pours, then we'll get wet, or we'll stay dry if we find shelter. Well, the clue here is that this either has to be paired with something, and the either or is going to be the main grouping. So we've got either, a clause, an or, and then another clause. That's our grouping. Now, looking at these clauses, well, there's something a little bit complicated going on here. We've got an if something or other, then we'll get wet. So we know that we're going to have a W after the arrow here. On this side, we'll stay dry if we find shelter. The if tells us that the bit about finding shelter will come before the arrow over here. So we've got this bit of grouping here to help us sort things out between the either and the or. And we know, as we just said, that we're going to have a structure like this, but we've yet to fill in this blank here. So what goes before the clause about W? Well, it rains only if it pours is what goes between the if and the then. It rains only if it pours. The only if gives us a consequent. There we have it. So that's the answer to that one. Carrying on, we had one of these problems with a fancy connective. What I'm going to do here is talk about how you could think your way through this. Now, the first thing to notice is that even though we're not allowed in our final answer to use the not and the and, we can start thinking our way through by using these and see what we pick up. So just make it clear to yourself. P down arrow Q means not P and not Q. That's what it means. But now notice, that means that not P down arrow not Q means not P and not Q. See, just by adding the tilde here and adding the tilde here, we ended up with this, but that means P and Q. And so, if we could find a way to say not P using just the down arrow, and likewise a way to say not Q, we would have what we need, but that's easy. If you remember anything about these problems at all, you should know, and in any case you can check. No matter what sentence we have, X down arrow X means not X. So substituting P down arrow P for not P here, and substituting Q down arrow Q for not Q here, we get our answer. Here we had a problem about disjunctive normal form. As long as you remember what disjunctive normal form is, it's dead easy. A disjunctive normal form is a bunch of things strung together by or. The things strung together by or are and statements, and the most important kind is where you think about each row of the truth table as picking out an and statement. Now I'm not going to write all the rows here, but the second and fifth rows would be these ones. In the second row, X is true, Y is true, and Z is false, and that picks out an obvious and statement. In the fifth row, X is false, Y is true, Z is true, and that also picks out an obvious and statement. And so that makes it easy to see that this statement here is true in exactly these two rows, because this part is true in exactly this row. This part is true in exactly this row. When you put them together with an or, then that or statement will be true in this row, true in this row, and not true in any others. So that's our answer. Here we had a short truth table problem, and this one took a little bit of work, but not too much. The easiest place to start here is with the double arrow, because this can be false in two cases. Our goal is to see if we can find a row where the premises are true and the conclusion false. There's no dead easy simple place to start, but this can be false in two cases, whereas in two cases where, as over here, everything's a little bit messier. So we set up two rows. And carrying on, given that we've got values for P and R in that first row, we can fill in those values under the other statements. And what we see is that once we fill in those values, it turns out that not R and not P is true. And so that's our next thing to notice. But now what we have to do is see if we can narrow the row down so that we get true for each of these two. Well, the easiest way to narrow down further is just to notice that this or statement needs a true part and let that be Q. You could have gone over here, it wouldn't be wrong, but this is a particularly easy way to do it. Now we take that value that we've got for Q and fill it in elsewhere. And what we notice before we even look here, we've already got a truth value here, is that if Q is true, not Q is false, but because P was true, not P is false, we've got a false here. And that means the and statement will be false. We have not found a counterexample. Do we keep going? Yes, we do. We keep going because for all we know, until we look, we might find that in this row, we get a counterexample. So we've got values for P and R. Fill them in. You can notice incidentally that because R is true in this second row, I should have written the value R here. Pardon me for this typo. This Q shouldn't have a value under it. We should put the value for the R over here. But ignoring that typo, the crucial thing is this. R is true, not P is false. That means R and not P is true, which means this formula is false. We tried both cases. We didn't find a counterexample. That means there's no way to refute this argument. This argument, therefore, is valid. Now, there are a couple of questions left, but for reasons of the size of files, I'm going to pause here and then you can pick this up in part 2.